Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
Rob Slamka of Madison is a Democratic candidate in the 78th Assembly District. The primary election is August 11th. Rob, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, WisconsinEye, for giving me this opportunity to do this Zoom interview. I'm thinking that you're going to find a lot of people a little bit uncomfortable with it because it's, unless you do it for business purposes, it's kind of a new thing for a lot of us. I want to assure all the listeners I do, in fact, have my pants on, however.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. You're challenging an incumbent. So I usually ask this question last, but what are the differences between you and the incumbent you're challenging?
Well, I really center all of my involvement on things around advocacy that I spent a lot of time developing. I was a 32-year sheet metal worker in Local 18. When we had the right to work in Act 10, I got involved and started to understand politics a little bit better. Frankly, it disgusted me that labor was in a situation where they were fighting government to try to resolve these issues without really negotiation. Scott Walker's Act 10, of course, was where it all started. So I've been busy helping people just about any place and every place, and got a chance to get a real flavor for the Capitol with about 3.5 years worth of walking through and checking out offices and asking for people to join me in my cause. So I've gotten fairly well adept at dealing with these issues, knowing where to go, who's worthy of help. That would be anyone who asks. As soon as they legitimize it, I'm ready to go. So my thing really is service. I can lean back on 32 years of experience in the working field and move on to a career that doesn't need to be very long in politics. It just needs to be meaningful.
Well, just a very quick follow-up, because I do have a whole bunch of other questions for you on topics. Are you saying then that the incumbent has not been activist enough, Rob?
You know, I remember when I was a sheet metal worker, at union meetings when they were discussing those issues. I had been in Madison for a little over a year when the seat became available, and it was Brett Hulsey was stepping aside to run for governor, and it was an open seat, and Mark and our rep were running in the election, and the union did not endorse her at that particular point in time. And obviously, a union looks at its own issues internally and what's best for the union, what's best for the members. So she didn't get that endorsement at that point in time. And I look back to 2018. There was an uncontested election. My state rep wound up getting an endorsement from the sheet metal workers from Smart International, and I was concerned about it. And I looked into it. And I wasn't real happy with how it came about. So those details could go on and on. I'm not going to take you down that road, but okay. Thank you.
That's okay. Oh, now got a whole bunch of questions on specific topics. Let's. What if tax collections do fall, as the governor has warned they might, by $2 billion next year, and the year starts on Wednesday, July 1? Would you cut spending or raise revenues to offset that potential $2 billion loss of revenue, Rob?
Yeah, am I the governor or am I the leadership in the Republican Party at this particular juncture?
You're one member. You're one member of the Assembly representing Madison, sir.
Well, I would absolutely and positively be fighting to make sure that the services that we have and the individuals who provide them were kept in place. Clearly, that would require a decision to move forward on budget expansion. I think we argued over that budget issue, and seemingly the Republicans, with the exception of what Tony Evers wound up achieving with the school funding, pretty much got what they wanted. So Technically, I think we're kind of ahead in that game, despite what revenues we might lose. And that's subjective too, because if the economy does recover, I think you said July 1st. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's the start of the new fiscal year, Rob.
So, and what I understand is there's a projection of a $2 billion shortfall. Is that correct?
Yeah, the governor has warned that it could be as high as that.
The governor's already voiced that.
So I just wonder, would you raise any taxes to offset that?
We would have to find a way to meet those needs. And I would have to say that there's a possibility that that would be something we'd have to look at. Absolutely.
Okay. Next subject. Who should draw the next district lines for U.S. House and seats in the Assembly and Senate? Right now, as you're aware, the party in power draws it, but the Governor Evers has recommended a People's Commission to draw it, and then recommended it to the legislature and governor. Who should draw the next boundaries, sir?
Well, the Supreme Court said it's going to be the legislature. The governor will be asking, using the power of his veto as a suggestion, to achieve a nonpartisan redistricting. I don't see Voss or Fitzgerald relinquishing what they have right now, which is hurtful to the democratic process. I believe that we're going to have to reach some kind of a compromise. The governor's going to absolutely have to figure out how to deal with that and come up with fair party lines.
If it were up to you, would you go along with the governor's People's Commission recommendation?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and he had clearly stated that he wants a nonpartisan body to make that decision. So I guess that's the only sticking point, so long as they don't decide to challenge him and request the veto, which I'm quite he would enforce.
Thank you. New subject. We know a lot more about police conduct nationally now than we did 2 months ago. Do we need statewide standards for how police treat those in custody? Some examples: banning chokeholds, no-knock warrants banned, keep a database of officers who most often use violence to subdue suspects. Do we need a statewide standard? The governor has recommended that.
I absolutely believe that we need a statewide standard on that particular issue. I've been looking at it quite a bit. Now's the time. We have the attention of the nation is focusing on that. And I think that if ever we're going to get that, it's now. And I absolutely agree that those standards need to be something that the state addresses. So, yes.
Thank you. 2 questions on property taxes. Wisconsin has some of the highest property taxes in the nation, which is why school districts and local governments can levy, what school districts and local governments can levy in property taxes is limited or capped. Schools and governments, of course, can exceed the caps through referendums if they need more money. If elected, would you vote to keep our property tax caps or these limits in place, or remove them?
On the issue of the schools and referendum funding, we know that generally speaking, when schools are forced into a situation, cities are forced into a situation where they have to place those votes, it becomes a very personal local issue. Obviously, we deal with a very high level of concern in the state of Wisconsin with our taxation. We're in a position where if we overtax, we force people to retire in other locations where it's more tax favorable. So it probably will lead into the next question, but when we deal with issues of overtaxation, we really do have to look at trying to figure out how to cap that. I've never been in a situation where I've been asked to do that. So I would have to put quite a bit of thought into it, but I would speculate that the people in the state of Wisconsin more than likely are concerned about maintaining what they have right now, and the caps would probably stay in place. I don't see that changing. Would I be in favor of it? We have to pull money from somewhere, or we have to cut services. So I think that's the challenge that everyone faces with this. You have to be realistic about that.
So a follow-up question on property taxes. Counties and local governments rely on the property tax to fund more than 40% of the cost of services they provide. That 40% is 7th highest in the nation 10 percentage points higher than any other Midwest state. One reason for the reliance on the property tax is a lack of alternative revenue options. Is it time for alternative revenue sources? For example, broadening the sales tax to now exempt products and services to be considered to reduce property taxes, Rob?
Yeah, it's interesting. To that issue, when I was a kid growing up, my dad used to say that our fuel taxes in the state of Wisconsin were artificially low and our fuel prices were artificially low. And that it's such a competitive market that you have bordering towns, you have bordering states, and there has to be some form of adjustment. Usually it comes out of the corporate sponsor. So doing something like that could effectively create a revenue stream that comes from corporate where we normally struggle to be able to tax them. If you're following what I'm saying, I believe that that's probably one of the reasons why we suffer so much in the state of Wisconsin is we've gotten to the point where we look at any tax as being a bad tax. User fees have replaced taxes. It's easier to say, we're going to charge you a fee. It's not really a tax, but it's a tax. So if you're talking about things like revenue generation, yeah, what you're talking about with deferred items, we could certainly be looking at that. It makes sense. And leveling out those percentages to surrounding states make a lot of sense.
You mentioned the fuel tax. Our 30.9 cent per gallon gas tax hasn't been raised in more than 10 years. Do we need to consider raising that as a long-term funding for our highways, Rob?
Absolutely. It's a game of either we make a decision to fix the roads and improve the infrastructure, or we try to make do with what we have. We know that a lot of the county highways in northern Wisconsin that were asphalt-based construction, they're in the process of reverting them back to gravel roads because of the maintenance issues with those roads. And it has absolutely everything to do with funding limits. And we know that a lot of the politics that undid Scott Walker had to do with his unwillingness to elevate taxes to fix our infrastructure and our road building project deficits and deficiencies.
Two COVID pandemic questions, Rob. Should businesses that follow all prescribed COVID-19 practices, whether from WEDC or the CDC, and recommendations be immune from frivolous lawsuits?
I put some thought into that, and I contacted my attorney and had a little bit of a conversation with him on that issue. Of course, attorneys like litigation. My personal opinion on this is I believe that the courts are set up to determine whether something is frivolous or not. They don't always do a great job with that, but I would prefer personally that there wouldn't be a legislative restriction on that, because generally speaking, legislation is worded in such a fashion that it benefits groups. And I think that it becomes one of those let the chips fall where they may. It probably would create a better conduct of the players if they knew that there was a possibility of litigation for bad behavior. Frankly, when I listen to this, I go, who gets to decide whether they were following the rules with COVID if you can't even get it into a courtroom?
Okay. Second question on COVID. The COVID has hit the economy and healthcare providers the state relies on especially hard. The recessions cause less revenue for the state, but more demands for safety net programs like Medicaid. In the next budget that the legislature, which you would vote on as a member of the assembly if you're elected, should hospitals be a greater should hospitals have a greater priority in the next state budget?
I think if you're going to be allocating additional funds to private entities, you didn't say university hospital, which is quasi-governmental to my understanding. So to me, that sounds like the possibility that somebody may be showing favoritism to a private entity. We're not the federal government where we can print money to make shortfalls up. We have to make sure that our healthcare system is structurally sound. And I think it brings into the conversation Medicaid expansion and actually taking some of the money that Wisconsin has sent to Washington back in the form of Medicare expansion. And if we can use the money to make sure that our safety net for our healthcare is provided for, I think that's a better direction.
Thank you. A study found that in 2015, out-of-state contractors were awarded $72 million in public works projects by local governments, and that number doubled to $146 million in 2018. My question, should bidding standards and requirements give priorities or preferences to Wisconsin companies when local governments approve major projects?
I think that they should. I mean, it's the equivalent of sending away those revenues, which could be used and recycled in the state of Wisconsin. If it doesn't make it back home to our neighborhoods, it's never going to be seen again. So I think that the multiplication factor of keeping the work local is very important. I guess there could always be an argument for doing things on the cheap, and you could expand that to the Chinese market. We still want to support American businesses, so there's this movement in that direction. I don't want to sound nationalistic or self-centric in what we do here in Wisconsin, but clearly, if we know that we're sending money out of the state, we have to look at that and factor it into some of the bidding processes to say, if we're sending that kind of money out, what effect is it having on our economy here in the state of Wisconsin?
Okay, two final questions. One of them comes from your Facebook page. You say on your Facebook page that you're suspicious, this deals with environmental issues. You're suspicious of, your words, the air we breathe, the food we ate, the food we eat, the water we rely on, and the advice we receive. What point are you making, Rob?
We have to be critical about any decision that comes forward. We've heard so much comment on trust in government. I think that transparency in government is a very important issue. Here in the state of Wisconsin, we've got contaminations, groundwater contaminations, two that are very notable that were caused by a product. They have PFAS, PFAS. And it's Tyco Johnson Control out of Marinette, Wisconsin. And I've not seen it, but my understanding is that it's in the groundwater source itself and runoff going into Green Bay, that being north of the city of Green Bay, Door County Peninsula. And then down here in Madison, where the Truex field uses the fire suppressant foam that creates contaminant that's worked its way into our waters in our lakes, Mendota, and on down through. So we look at that, and I think that there's going to be a lot of individual mitigation. The government's going to want to say, we're not responsible, it was another contractor. It happened at Truex Field. Obviously, if you're a Madisonian, that what happens at Truex affects us, whether it's F-35s coming to town and additional noise burdens. The federal government has a responsibility, in my mind, to at least clean up the mess in that regard. I don't think it should be put upon the state of Wisconsin. Another revenue stream, I believe, to allow us to be able to not have a situation where we're spending money that we could allocate other places and we still get the mess cleaned up. That situation is kind of like a Superfund type thing.
Do you oppose the F-35s coming to Madison?
I haven't heard them yet. I've heard,
okay.
I don't believe that I have, but
okay.
It's concerning to me from the standpoint that there are definitely people who are probably going to have additional concerns. It's been well documented that there are health concerns that are revolving around that. I know that Jacksonville was in the contention for it, and they actually wanted it. So I'm kind of surprised that with as much outcry as there was, that what voices had supported won over. My understanding is strategically that particular base could have been used for training of another variety, where possibly we wouldn't have the fighter jet noise at all. So, yeah, I'm disappointed that it wound up coming to Wisconsin. The financial end of it and the economic gain is yet to be seen. I know that people who live that reality, who work there, certainly enjoy something from their coming here, but the noise mitigation, that's going to be a real big issue here. I'm sure it's going to be.
We're almost out of time, so I just real quickly, is there any one issue that is central to your campaign that I haven't asked about, just very quickly, Rob?
Yeah, and it's a touchy one. I believe that I have some unique abilities to restore a balance of worker fairness in Wisconsin. The first thing I'd have to do is, of course, convince people that the issue of collective bargaining is more to a basic human right than something that should have been legislated away. I was not happy with what Scott Walker did in that regard. I think it was a cheap shortcut for him to not have to negotiate with the state unions. I understand why he did it, and I truly do believe that it's something we revisit and restore, because, we're in Wisconsin as a consequence of what happened with that. Whether you're a union worker or a non-union worker, we are so at will, literally at will as far as our employment. We have no workers' rights. So to that end, I guarantee you that my efforts are going to be centered around building a workers' bill of rights and fixing a lot of these problems that I see and have a pretty unique perspective on because of where I come from, labor history-wise.
Thank you very much. Rob Slamka of Madison is a Democratic candidate in the 78th Assembly District. The primary election is August 11th. Rob, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Steve. You have a great day. Thanks, listeners. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thanks.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.